Hi, I'm Jennifer Byrne, and tonight we're celebrating one of this country's most admired authors and men, Tom Keneally. Over the years, he's written histories, plays, non-fiction, and literally dozens of novels. A true elder of the tribe, who this year marks his 50th year in publishing, hence the party. He's 78 now, still writing, still fighting, still going strong. And we'll talk to Tom in just a minute, but first, let's hear from some of his friends here tonight.
Anybody that can do anything for 50 years gets a big tick from me. You can get discovered, then you got to hang in there, then you got to keep producing the work, and then you got to last. Thomas has done it all.
Most writers have if they're lucky, have a few small peaks of achievement. Tom, though, is the Himalayas.
He is a born, gifted storyteller, writer, and also uses words beautifully. There are not many people who can do all that in the literary world.
Wherever I go in the world, Tom is regarded as the #1 Australian writer and one of the great writers in the world.
Tom Keneally, welcome to this ongoing celebration of your 50th year of publication. Let's start with the book that, if you were a pop star, would have to be called your greatest hit. I mean, you won the Booker with it. It was top of the New York Times bestseller list. Schindler's Ark, or as Spielberg later called it, Schindler's List. That story about how it all started with a broken briefcase is a beauty. Share it, please.
Well, I had gone to an Italian film festival with people like Brian and Bruce Beresford, and on the way home, I was in Beverly Hills. My briefcase had come apart. I was doing a little book tour, in fact, and I was waiting for the Sunday night flight to Australia. On Saturday morning, I went to buy a new briefcase, and the little neighborhood store I went to was owned by Leopold Pfefferberg, a Schindler survivor. At the back of his repair room, he had 2 filing cabinets full of Schindleriana. So that's where it all began. He had time to persuade me he had a story.
People often bail up writers and say, I've got a great story for you. And people don't listen. What made you listen to this one?
Well, when he copied the material, some of the material, and gave it to me, I realized that this was an exceptional story, because through this very flawed Nazi, using him as a lens, one could see every stage of the Holocaust, from confiscation of property to ghettoization, to slave labor, to internment camps, to destruction camps. And I felt that it brought a great catastrophe, great human catastrophe, to an imaginable scale. It made it imaginable. It made it palpable, because it was confined to a discrete number of people.
So it put the story around the bones, and you couldn't get your head around the horror of the bones.
Yes, there's an extent to which 6 million killed in the Holocaust, 3 million non-Jewish Poles as well. These are meaningless figures. They defeat the capacity of the imagination to latch onto them. But through a limited lens like Schindler, you could see it happening to people you could identify, and that he identified with, that the imagination could engage.
This is really cruel, Oscar. You're giving them hope. You shouldn't do that. That's cruel.
This really was something of a pattern for you, and has been through your career, that you take a true historical event and then you turn it into fiction. You did it 10 years before Schindler's Ark with The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, about a young Aboriginal who tried so hard to fit into white life, couldn't, and basically exploded in a hideous, violent rage. did you have any idea how big that book was going to be? That's your other biggest hit.
No. And indeed, like most writers are like mothers. They think that they have neglected children who have as much merit as the ones that are eminent, you know. And I've often thought that I've written many better books technically than The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, but I suppose it had an undeniable passion and an undeniable direction. And again, it was based very loosely on the Jimmy Governor massacres of 1900, and I called him Jimmy Blacksmith and took it from there. But one is a novel and the other is kind of faction. It's like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. It set out deliberately to be like that, to fit between biography and I thought the biography could make a weak biography. I felt that genre was significant.
This was written
to it
after In Cold Blood, wasn't it? So you were inspired by that narrative non-fiction, isn't it?
Yes, indeed, and some of Tom Wolfe's new journalism too.
You appeared in Fred Skepsi's film. You acted
The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith. Yes,
absolutely, as the role of the cook, the man who cuckolded Jimmy.
Yes,
Took Jimmy's white wife.
We need some water for the potatoes, if you want to be of service. All right, boss.
And how was your feeling about being a thespian?
Well, I love it. Fred put me in The Devil's Playground as a monk, a very cheery monk who told all the kids they were going to hell and that eternity was eternity.
Well, trying's the important thing. Keep trying and pray to God. He'll help you.
I did ask Spielberg if I could be the rabbi Lebedev in Schindler's List, but he sort of didn't answer me and let it slide.
Well, I don't like to be rude, but Fred Skepsi did say to me that as an actor, you make an excellent novelist.
And I think he's right.
Jimmy Blacksmith was your 7th novel, so you were not an overnight success at all. Let's go right back to the beginning of not Thomas Keneally, Michael Thomas, as you were born.
Yeah.
Were you a bookish boy?
Very much so, yeah. I tried to hang with the jocks, but also hang with the nerds. And I was a nerd, of course, as every writer is a bit of a nerd. But I read everything I could get hold of. And my mother, God bless her, was passionate about books, absolutely passionate. Even I remember before she died on This Is Your Life, she said very seriously to Mike Munro, a child with a book is never bored. And that was the principle that she used with us. So we couldn't say in Homebush, I'm bored. When we did Honours English, the brother in charge, a great bloke, led us Honours English boys to the back of the room where there was a book cabinet, and locked away in the bottom of that was all the good stuff.
Like?
Evelyn Waugh, Graham Greene, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and W.H. Auden, Spender. So we got access to this material, which astonished us because the way the curriculum was then, we thought poetry was situated in the Northern Hemisphere, so was the novel, and it wasn't Australians' jobs to write novels, and it wasn't modern people's job to write literature because it was all done back there. It finished with Tennyson and Thomas Hardy, perhaps.
So to have people like Evelyn Waugh,
Graham Greene, and...
do you remember being excited?
Oh, yes, yeah, very much. In fact, I was very interested in the Jared Manley Hopkins, because although he was a stitched-up Jesuit, he drove the English language like a Ferrari. I remember wearing a pocket edition of his poetry in the breast pocket of my school uniform, in the belief that it would somehow, its emanations would attract girls. It's racy. I didn't know the bloke
I thought you were going to say, elevate your mind. No, attract girls.
Yes, I thought this is so radioactive. It will, yes, I was very...
Did it? Did it?
No. The girl I best liked became a nun. I'd like to say one word from me and women enter the convent.
The famous Bernadette Curran.
Yes,
Is that right?
she's called that in a little memoir I wrote.
Well, this
Homebush
is
Boy.
the Homebush Boy. I have to say that is one of my favourite pictures of you on the cover of Homebush Boy. You're there with your cowlick and you're dressed up in a uniform. You were about, I think, 7 or 8 when your father went off to war. Mm-hmm. You lived in a house with no phone, no car.
Yes.
Did you feel the man of the house with him away? Were you obligated?
Yes, I was told I was, and I did a lot of caring of my little brother, etc., carried the nappy bag, tried to whip him into shape, of course, and I took that role rather seriously. And my mother, while my father was away, had a big influence on me. When he returned, as was normal at that stage of history, he found a bit of fault with the way she'd been raising us, you know. And my father was a great character, though, and a wonderful bloke, but he was a strong character, a very masculine character. He did think that I had been raised a bit wet.
A bit spoilt.
Yes. And
I must say, I read somewhere that when you were learning to write on a slate, in fact, your first letter was I, and you wrote it over and over and over again.
Narcissism exhibited itself early,
Is that true?
on a slate, yeah.
Neither of your parents, as I understand it, went past 6th grade, is that right?
That's right. They did the primary final.
And you, however, did get a scholarship to university, but you went a completely different way.
Yes.
You decided to enter the seminary. Did you have any religious vocation?
I came out of a particular kind of family that only existed then. They were Catholics, observant Catholics on the one hand, and thus part of what was a fairly totalitarian system of belief. On the other hand, they were very left-wing Labour, that in terms of social justice.
But you went into a male-dominated,
absolutely,
very strict, authoritarian environment. You say it was Bernadette Curran. You always joke about it was because she went to become a nun, so you went to become a priest. What the heck were you doing there, though?
Well, it was more credible in those days. Our view of the priesthood was extremely romantic. But, of course, at odds with that view of the priesthood was the maleness, the authoritarian side, etc., and it's the authoritarian side that ultimately drove me away, and it drove lots of people away.
What were the best things you took out of those seminary years?
I think that metaphysical sense of good and evil and friendships, but I became persona non grata for saying in the late 60s, perhaps with too much bitterness, with far too much bitterness, I said that the church was as capable as any institution of being corrupt. Now we know that to be the case, but in the 1960s, it was a scandalous statement.
How traumatic was it to live?
Well, I had already had a kind of crack up. I wasn't game to say that for years. And
you're using crack up as in a breakdown?
Yeah, I was so mentally exhausted. I began to write, and the Bulletin published 2 of my short stories. This was astounding to me. Then one Christmas holidays, 62 to 63, I sat down and wrote a novel, sent it off to an English publisher, and then got a telegram in the middle of 1963 saying they would publish it. Now, this was from the fact that they were offering me slave labour rates and a colonial royalty that existed then. So you didn't get paid as much for books sold in Australia as you did for books sold in England. You got a reduced royalty.
Is it because the class of the reader? The poor class of the reader.
Colonial royalty, they called it.
At your 50th, one of the great lines from Richard Flanagan was that in the 1950s, the biggest selling Australian book was Sheep Management and Diseases. How did you think you were going to find an audience here?
Yes. If you can't open the batting for Australia, if you can't play 5-8 for the Kangaroos, write a book, my son.
That book, The Place at Whitten, which was, what a coincidence, a murder mystery set in a monastery, that you said it saved your life. It took all the sense of failure and it made you feel like a restored person.
Yes.
Was there a plan B?
No, there was no plan B, and I am very much aware, people think it's false modesty when I say this, I'm very much aware that today's climate for getting published is much tougher, and I wonder if The Place at Whitten would have been published. People have read it recently and say they enjoy it, but it's a very flawed book technically, and I'm not game ever to read it again. I mean, I knew no one who'd been published ever, who'd written a novel. So I had no one to tell me that it was impossible to...
Why did you?
I was driven enough. I mean, I think that if you're marginal, if you feel marginalised, as I did, self-marginalised, my own fault, nonetheless, if you feel on the margins, you are more desperate to write.
But that's why I would have thought of all the things that this lost soul, you've described yourself as a lost soul at that time, would have wanted to be found by is this non-existing publishing industry. There isn't one. No one believes you can make a go of it.
Yes.
What were you thinking?
Yes. There was, when that book was published, there wasn't a single literary agent in Australia. No agent you could take your book to. You had to send it off into the void. There was no Society of Authors, so the Society of Authors had just been founded with no fanfare by brave souls like Dal Stevens, Morris West and Barbara Jeffress and people of that ilk, Jill Hellier. And then there were no festivals. So this thing that we see at literary festivals where people will tell you how hard it is to make a living writing, and they'll say, oh, the solitude of it all. You know, I went mad. There was no one to warn me about madness, poverty, any of that stuff. And out of a sort of post-colonial innocence, I just went ahead and did it.
Well, your decision was vindicated because, I mean, by the time you were in your early 30s, you won back-to-back Miles Franklin Awards. You went on. And probably more importantly, you also met Judith Mary Martin, a former novice nun, a nurse, who paid you the ultimate literary compliment of becoming your wife.
Yes, she was nursing my mother in a hospital. My mother had had an operation. My mother was, of course, very my boy the novelist, and she forced Judy to read the book. Interestingly, she never thought it was a weird proposition. I mean, I look back to 1964, 1965, and her acceptance of the fact that I was going to write.
You were blessed, the two of you, with two daughters, with Margaret and Jane.
Yeah, and they had a big impact on making me write from the point of view of women, like Woman of the Inner Sea. Now, that's one I wrote in the 90s, and it's just been reissued. And as a matter of fact, it was this is heavy name dropping, but Hillary Clinton loved it. And on the basis of it, invited Judy and myself to dinner at the White House.
So you could discuss your book.
Yeah.
The thing I love about that book, and I wonder if Hillary Clinton commented, this woman goes into the outback, but she travels with an emu and a kangaroo.
And I think the kangaroo's called Chifley.
That's right, and Menzies is the name of the emu. And clearly, they're members of the coat of arms, and they go.
Yeah.
Now that is such an Australian conceit. Did Hillary get it?
Oh, yes, I think so. She just accepted that a kangaroo, I think, would have that sort of percipience.
You've written so many kinds of books, but you've also written multiple books, sometimes in the same year. And as I understand it, this caused publishers and even the critics a degree of perturbation. And they said, like, stop writing so much, enough words.
Yes, enough already, a Melbourne critic said.
Why?
That was indicative of the fact that I saw this as an industrial thing. I mean, it's from my parents, their attitude to their job. I saw it as a job you do as well as something transcendent, something mysterious, something you can't account for.
But they weren't just dismissing it because there were multiple books published and there were too many words all round, Thomas.
Yeah.
There was a concerted suggestion for a period that you were... I think the phrase was that you were squandering your talent, that you could have been a major, important figure, but you had turned commercial. But I think in one really weird phrase about Schindler's Ark, that you were writing warm, fuzzy Holocaust novels. Like it was some kind of cop-out.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Well, if I did squander my talent, it wasn't for want of trying. I think they had a narrow view of what novelists should do. I think the parameters within which novelists work now, within which Australian novelists work, is a very different and broader sweep. Then there was a sense that writers had a cultural debt to produce the great Australian novel, and they had to fill out the landscape of Ostlit. So there was a great cultural series.
So you went overseas and you wrote about
other places, and
so that was a betrayal.
And yes, and I mean, English writers write about other places in the past, and Americans do. It seemed that Australians were prohibited because they had a cultural duty to this country. Was there an element too, Thomas, that your activism and your involvement in whether it was the Republican movement, whether it was these days refugee treatment, Aboriginals and their role in Australian society, is that partly what they were paying out on too? Like you should sit down in your office and don't poke arguments with the great historian Geoffrey Blainey, who is a great historian. It was often right-wing people who found me most objectionable. And I did play into their hands, It does take two to tango, and you don't realise it at the time. But yes, I have always had an intemperate nature. I think many people would be surprised looking at the treatment you get now. Yes, to know that you were actually a target of real ferocity. Yes, if I get a crook review now, it's done with a certain respect. And it's very welcome. It's because they know you passed it, of course. Does that make you feel uncomfortable sometimes, how tightly you're embraced now? No, I don't mind being embraced. I don't mind people saying nice things about my books. Whatever could have been said about the 70s and 80s, I'm trying hard to write great Australian novels, but I'm still wondering a bit. Researching the histories, of course, brings you a lot of stories. I'm very attracted to writing a story about the bomb tests in South Australia and Montebello Island. Very attracted to writing a novel about the rejected Englishman who came here, Dickens' two sons and Trollope's son, Fred Trollope. So there are all these ideas out there, but the question is, when does it lodge?
I mean, you're 78, as you say.
Yeah.
Even if you live another till 100, is that a cause for grief for you that you're not going to write all these books?
No, I did give a talk at the ASA in which I listed about 20 perfectly viable plots for quite serious novels and said I'll never get round, including the Dickens boys, and I said I'll never get round to writing them. You go and you have my permission to take these ideas.
Just scatting them.
Write novels on them.
You're clearly still passionate about things and ambitious for your writing. I wonder, though, once you had grandchildren, whether you made a choice that you're going to be less obsessive.
Definitely. And I find that if you give time to them, you actually work more efficiently in the time you have. Hey, good work, Gus.
Were you conscious of making a choice, though?
Oh, yes, indeed, of saying they come first. I mean, still obsessive. When I'm working, I'm pretty much working. I do loaf like most office workers. I do look for distractions, but over a day, if quite a bit gets done.
But you still love it, sitting there typing?
Yes, but whoever said over my cradle in Kempsey, New South Wales, what fairy godmother ever turned up and said I was going to be a great writer? Maybe I'm content with being a writer now.
It's been so lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much, Tom. Long may you write.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. With servants of the book like you, why wouldn't